for another, job at Roosevelt, you would deny it or get somebody to run. I won't mention his name. He passed on, and a lot of people thought he was a great principal. So fine. Uh, but the one of the things that when I read the book, I'll be honest with you, I learned something, and I say, man, this thing is well written, man. This thing is direct to the point. It's clear. Everything you read, and that was because one of the reasons was because of the editor that I work with. He's very good, and this thing could be used as a toolkit. In other words, teachers, students, uh, professors, because this is for professors too. It's for college professors, university professors, uh, community college. Uh, they can use it because every chapter it starts with the indigenous. It starts with the invasion with Columbus in the Bahamas in 1492, and I get a lot of it, the information uh, from Bartolomé de las Casas, who was an encumbero, but he gave it up and he started fighting for the rights of the indigenous. And he's been criticized, but he was the book that is famous for is devastation of the Indies. So you might, if you want to really get into the pre-Columbian thing, you might want to, because the book has, it's the toolkit. It has, when you do a dissertation, they have you do significance of theory and practice, and this book has both. Okay, because just looking at, if you were to read the whole book and really memorize this stuff, man, you're gonna be a powerful person, I think, because like I say, you know, knowledge is power. Knowledge is power. And you're starting with the conquest of the West Indies, and you go in chapter 12 all the way from the 1968 East Los Angeles student walkouts to the COVID-19 pandemic. Hey, remember the first time the students, the big problem with COVID-19 was because Latino and African American students were suffering the most, and English language learners, because they couldn't connect to the lessons. But the big mistake or the big problem was that the school district, especially LA Unified, their priority was to protect the students. It wasn't instruction. So a lot of the some of the reforms or some of the academic achievements were being lost. So I still don't know what Caravalho, the superintendent, what his plan is. Because they say that plan is going to take about 3 years to solve. And, school starts on the 15th of August. So uh, I don't see the scores that did come out. Everyone knew they would be low, and they were. And the kids that are really suffering the most are the special ed or special needs kids and the English language learners. Their scores, if you look at the scores in the book, I repeat it, their reclassification rates for English language proficiency, very low. Their graduation rates. Now, LA Unified, they talk about these huge graduation rates. But what the people don't know, something like in 2015, before one would have to pass the California exit exam in order to get a diploma. Well, LA Unified cut it. You don't have to. You don't have to pass that to get a diploma, and that's very important because, in my opinion, a lot of these kids are not being, you know, they're not really being proficient academically, and yet they're going to colleges, community colleges, and four-year Cal State and UCs, and they're not cutting it. Uh, so the LA Unified, uh, they cut the high school exit exam. Uh, and not only that, what else did they do? When I taught, when Fernando taught, in order to graduate from LA Unified and get a diploma, you had to have 230 credits. You know what it is now? 210. So when Monica Garcia and all these school board members say, look at these huge graduation rates of Roosevelt and Garfield and Wilson, look at the guy, but they don't tell you. They reduced the credits to graduate and they cut the high school, the California high school exit exam. So anyway, I wanted to kind of, the book is like I said, there's chapters in there that, if you want to concentrate on one topic, fine. But if you really want to be, really get a significant amount of information, uh, you know, 12 chapters, and some of the chapters are like only four pages. But like I had mentioned, when I went to Lincoln High School was the first time that I had ever had a Mexican or a Latino teacher. Lincoln was, when I went, was from 7th to the 12th grade. It was a combination high school and junior high. Okay, not anymore, but and if they're Mexican or Latino teachers, they wouldn't speak Spanish to you because they didn't allow it in class anyway. But they wouldn't speak Spanish to you. The guy that started speaking Spanish to you and treated you like an extended family was Sal Castro. Man, he had a sense of humor. I never had Sal for a class, but he was the athletic coordinator. The principal Sal was transferred from Belmont High School because he allowed some students to say a word. They were running for student government to say a few words in Spanish. And he was, and they transferred him for that. Unbelievable. Yeah. So when he came to Lincoln, they made him the athletic coordinator. So I got to know Sal, and that didn't keep him out of trouble. Sal was the one that came up with the walkout. So I'm at Lincoln High School. I'm into athletics because Lincoln High School has a very proud tradition and history of athletes there, like Kenny Washington, people like that, people like Tony Kachinas, who played for SC, Doug Huff, who played for UCLA. Kachinas set the 440-yard record, still stands, and tremendous athletes, the department there. But there were some abuses too. They would swat you. They would hit you with a paddle. If you acted out in class, they would hit you with a paddle. They would swat you. Sometimes they would swat you in the hall. Come here. You know, touch your toes. Whack. Some of the teachers, female, would give the boys swat. They didn't give girls paddling or swats. I remember the day that a teacher, and I don't really name teachers, the only ones I name maybe are Sal and Ray Lopez, a couple of people like that, but the negative teachers I don't name. I remember there's one English teacher, he got an African American student in front of the class, and he had a paddle that was kind of like a sword. He must have hit him about, swatted him about 3 or 4 times, and it broke in front of the class. And so that was one of the negative aspects, you know, the athletics. I was, you know, all league in track my senior year, and you know, I lettered in football 3 years, varsity, B and C track, all league. So I was already being uh, groomed to be a monolingual, you know, English speaking student that would probably uh, be drafted, because a lot of the male students were put, and in Lincoln at that time was what they call an industrial school. They had all these shop classes. They had metal shop, wood shop, upholstery shop, auto shop, print shop. I mean, you name it. Those classes are gone. They're gone now. But that's where they would track you. Some of the alumni that I talked to, they told me, you know, they said, hey, we would ask the counselors, hey, we want to go to college. And the counselor would just simply say, you're not college material. You're not college material. And the girls were taking business classes and home economics. Nothing's wrong with that. I mean, you know, taking care of kids and home ec and cooking and sewing and whatever. But when they would ask to go to college, the counselors would say, "Oh, you're not college material." So they had, you know, they had the swatting, they had uh, the industrial arts classes for the males, and they had the home ec for the females and business classes, but not really college type classes. So what happened, I think, with a lot of the industrial arts guys that took those shop classes, well, they were prime material for the draft. You know, they were drafted. Uh, Lincoln High School uh, is right now, I think in October, kind of like a tentative date, they're going to put a Vietnam era monument of those graduates from Lincoln High School that served. Um, fine, you know, I think that's historic, and that really salutes our veterans. So they're going to do that. Um, some of the other things, and this one you might not believe. When I was there as a student, and then I guess I graduated in '68. I participated in the walkouts. I wasn't a student leader, but when I got to Lincoln in '62, they did not allow the girls to wear pants. And I think it was until about '69 or '70 they started letting them wear pants maybe on Fridays and stuff. And so that was another thing. The dress code. Uh, you look at pictures of those students. You know, if you had your shirt uh, not tucked in, uh, I mean, the administrators would would tell you they took it in. But what I didn't mention on the swatting thing is people you didn't know. Sometimes you didn't even know why you were being swatted. I didn't. I mean, seventh, eighth grade or whatever. I mean, you don't have. They didn't show you the policy for swatting because that's corporal punishment. LA Unified doesn't allow that. You get some teacher swatting some kid, and that teacher's going to be arrested for assault and battery. The pants thing too. That was that was you know you know and the shop classes were you know they were tracking you, but they were tracking you into industrial arts classes. They also in the book they called them uh, neighborhood schools also. Uh, so uh, Lincoln High School did not have parent involvement. They now they have parent involvement councils, Title I, so forth. They wanted Mexican food. They wanted cafeteria workers that would cook Mexican food. They didn't have Mexican food. Uh, so there was a lot of stuff going on. And Sal, once that walkout occurred, we started getting more changes. Uh, Julian Nava, I think it was called the 4214. At the time, he was the only LA school board member that was Mexican American. And he passed a policy where principals that were of Hispanic descent would wouldn't have to take the regular test to become a principal because of the lack and because they had experience. That passed, and so and some of those guys, I'm not going to mention any names, but some of those guys were terrible. One of them that I had at Roosevelt, he won't mention the name, but I filed 31 grievances on him, and so there was a lot of stuff. We after the walk-offs, there was more principals, vice principals, uh, and one of the things that continues uh, is tracking. Tracking is not as rigid as it was, you know, back, back then, but it's still tracking. And most teachers, especially in the high schools, they have what they call advisement now. And a lot of teachers have these college-bound kids, and you know, they give them, uh, the, supposedly the best teachers and so forth, and the resources. But I'm not a proponent of tracking. I think there has to be detracking. I think when I taught, one of the things that I did not want to teach the AP, the advanced placement. I wanted regular kids like me. I wanted regular kids, and the kids that I had at Roosevelt, man, some of them scored high on the standard exams, and the administration didn't care. They didn't care. My kids were scoring, and I had some pretty good kids. And but there were a lot of changes. Uh, like I mentioned, more principals, vice principals, teachers, uh, parent advisory council, and even some schools now even have where the parents, the students, they get together and they design they formulate a dress code, for their kids at campus. So there still has to be, like I mentioned, the pandemic. I don't see that the experts say maybe 3 years or longer before that you know gets resolved, because the students are really hurt, because especially the African American and Latino students. And I have it in my book. I have it documented. It was a dissertation by a person from USC that had. I was very surprised that she had done a study. Too much emphasis on protecting the kids and not educating them. And so now we're as a result of that, we're got to catch up again. And it's the black and brown students, English language learners, special ed. Some of the issues are still hurting us. The consular to student ratio, believe it or not, according to the UTLA and LAUSD contract, it's 500-1. It can go as high as 500. How can you counsel students if you have 500 kids? No, there's no way. There's no way you can do it. So, at any rate, I'm gonna, I in the book, I mention, critical media literacy. I would show films in the class, but I never showed films for entertainment. They had questions that they had to answer, and I showed some films because I wanted to build media literacy skills. In the book, I also am a big proponent of culturally responsive learning. How culture mediates, I believe that culture mediates the way you learn, how it influences you. And I get into that. Um, and I get into some media literacy stuff with the immigrant community, but that was before the critical media stuff. It's recent. It's from a brilliant professor that I had at UCLA, Douglas Kellner, um, and Peter McLaren was also in my dissertation committee. Douglas Kellner was one, the late Montgomery Quiñones, and Daniel Sorosano was on my dissertation committee. So I can open it up now for some questions. Yeah.
It's a fascinating analysis you upbringing. My friend Ron Wilkins has written and done extensive analysis of Afro-American Los Angeles of the time of the 1780s to the time of the 1850s. It's often neglected by people who do Mexican American, Chicano history, Latino history, about their impact and how you title this thing, Struggle for Education, Equity in California. The best mayor in LA history is really an Afro-American, Pico Boulevard, named after him. And my friend Ron Wilkins engaged on this stuff. He was very interested in this history of Afro-Americans and the meaning to what the movement means. So how would you put that history, 1780s to 1850s, of Chicano. Los Angeles means African word. It's often the people who Mexican American, Chicano. We're going to see it all with Chicano word too. Right? You know that? So why isn't this talked about more?
Well, one of the big reasons and one of the problems that I didn't uh, state was the lack, and we still have it today, was the lack of representation. We can say Mexican, Chicano, Latino, indigeneity in the textbooks. Uh, for instance, at Roosevelt High School, the department was using a book. Uh, I mentioned it in my book. It really excluded us. And it wasn't until Juan Gomez Quinones, professor at UCLA, Deborah Weber, Riverside, UC, uh, Dr. Luis Arroyo, Long Beach State, they wrote a critique, and I made board presentations to the LAUSD board. I said, you guys are not, you're not adopting books that has any content. The book we were using, I went over 1,000 pages and maybe had 10 pages on content on Mexican Latino history. So we were really being excluded, and we still are. And the books, anybody can go to LA Unified, call up and say, I want to look at the books that you guys are using in high school or middle schools. And you can use those books. I mean, you can browse them, and make presentations and say, hey, you're not using the correct textbook. So the textbook thing, it's like in my book, I give, I think I cite 3 or 4, maybe more. I cite some films like Fear and Learning at Hoover Elementary School, one of the outstanding films, and other ones, but I cite 3 or 4 different supplemental books that you can use because there's nothing current. There's nothing current in terms of the black education experience. I don't know what's out there. In terms of the Mexican Latino, there's 44 families were the ones that settled in Los Angeles, and the majority were African American. People don't know that. Right there in Olvera Street is where you had, that's where LA began, 1780. So it was 44 families, most of them were black. But who knows? Are they teaching that in? So the textbook issue is very, very important. Literature, the history books, the world history books, and teaching cultural, teaching that style, of teaching is very important because it validates not only the language, it validates the culture, the experiences, because culture mediates how you learn. And so in the book, I get into a thing called deficit thinking. Well, what's deficit thinking? Well, it doesn't have to do with the budget, okay? Deficit thinking is you're blaming the student and their families and their culture for not learning. That's the way I use deficit thinking. And what has to be done, and what I did at Roosevelt High School, I gave family histories. And I would tell my students, I'll learn some about your family, but I want you to learn about your family. So they would do that, and I would give them a you know a series of questions, about 20 questions, and they would do a presentation. Said, I want you to learn about your family, you know, because culture should be seen not as a deficit where it's going to hurt you, but it should be seen as an asset, okay? And too many educators, and it's in the book, where we're saying, oh, you can't waste your time with these kids, it's just, they don't have the capacity, they were teaching them, they were teaching them, uh, uh, you know, gardening and agriculture and stuff like that in the elementary grades. They said, don't worry about them. Give them these vocational skills because they're not going to graduate. They're going to drop out, and at least if they're going to have some skills, some vocational skills.
You mentioned this thing about deficit learning, and we kind of see how they weaponize this whole notion of saying like slaves they benefited, so they kind
Oh
of
yeah, yeah.
and I think of the example that happened when they repatriated 500,000 Mexicanos to Mexico for no
And a
legal
lot of them were citizens.
exactly legal justification. But to me, that's one uh, major point in U.S. history
That's
that
right.
should have never happened. And there's other places where they conflate stuff and they'll blame the people. Um, and they've done it to Japanese, to Chinese, to all the immigrant laborers, where they systematically, you make progress in this country, you grow in this country, then they systematically put you back to square one. And to me, when they did that to
Yeah,
the
the
Mexicanos,
Chinese Exclusion Act of
yeah,
1880.
yeah, there was no reason for them to send them back in the first place. They were here already. They had legitimate right,
Yeah.
and I don't know how in the hell that was allowed to happen. But what other examples do you see as poignant in the progress of people of color here?
Well, I'm glad you brought that out because this had the Full Rights for Immigrants Coalition. I'm a member. Uh, one Jose Gutierrez, good friend of mine, first met him in 1992 when we were struggling for the Chicana and Chicano Studies Department in UCLA. This, I wasn't able to go on the car caravan to Florida, but we wrote letters. We understood that the biggest union, the National Education Association, was having their yearly uh, meeting there in Orlando, Florida. And we wrote letters. We told the president of the NEA, they cancel it because DeSantis, governor, he's got all these anti-immigrant laws. The state. Let me repeat that. The state has passed. Well, the state does not regulate immigration. It's the federal government. So now you have a bunch of lawsuits. And they're going to probably overturn that just like they did 187. And there were some laws in Arizona that they overturned also. And the Full Rights for Immigrants Coalition was the group that drove all the way to Orlando, Florida. And it was very successful because, I watch a lot of the Spanish media, uh, but unfortunately, the English language news media doesn't really report. I mean, they'll report car chases when Latinos are in a car, and, people being shot by the cops and African Americans, and you know, uh, people being robbed by African Americans, people being stabbed in the bus, or right. I mean, it's all this stuff, and they hide behind the First Amendment, but like I mentioned before, but they're not rated. They're not rated, and the negative images, and they hide behind the First Amendment. It's for profit, and it's getting worse. It's getting worse. For the full rights for immigrants, which I'm a member of, we've had over 55 marches for immigrant rights. We've had press conferences at the federal building, you name it, for immigrant rights, uh, for a path to citizenship, you know. And so they went to Florida, and now you're going to hear about it soon again. Now they're going to do a car caravan to Washington D.C. Yeah, to Washington D.C. It might take place in October. They don't really have the route yet, the dates. Congress has to be in session. The weather will probably be a factor. So the Full Rights for Immigrants Coalition and this DeSantis guy, making that that
Also,
that comment about slavery that benefited man, that's a really hard one to believe how they benefited. Uh, so he made that comment, but I think that his anti-immigration legislation, a lot of it's going to bite the dust. It's not a federal. It's got to be federal. It's not. And he's going down in the polls anyway. And one of the reasons he's going down in the poll, when you run for office, you don't attack the most vulnerable people, your immigrant community. You know, you don't attack them. What you do is any smart politician is going for the middle class. Those are the people that you want to vote for you. They don't care about the immigrants. You think they care about the immigrants? Hey man, they care about inflation, their gasoline prices, all this corruption in Washington, the racism and everything. Uh, you know, you know that's what they care. That's the middle class. Their student loans and stuff like that. Yeah.
I was going to ask, do you think that since Donald Trump was elected, that their platform is racism?
Can you repeat that again?
Sorry. Do you think that since 2016, the platform for the Republican Party is racism now?
Oh yeah, it's fascism. You know, I won't say racism. I'll say fascism because in fascism, racism is a component of that. It's also anti-union. It's anti-worker. It's based on class. Ethnicity. So, but like I mentioned, DeSantis actually went down in the polls. So, he didn't help himself. And there's going to be another car caravan to Washington, D.C. to talk to the, we have to keep struggling for immigrant rights. We have to just keep struggling, and I've been in that coalition, and we want we encourage everybody to get involved, and especially Mexican and Chicano Latinos, because a lot of them from the Chicano movement back in the day, they weren't really into immigration, and it's a very, very important issue.
so with that, how do how do we get more Chicanos, Mexicanos, immigrants involved? Because I know that, you know, a lot of people I know, and that, you know, we're immigrants, and you know, we were born here, and we have family all over Mexico. Come here, um, we've been here, but sometimes we get into this tendency of assimilating them. We forget who we are, you know, and I think that's a problem, and you know, because they are our brothers and cousins, and you know, abuelitos and stuff. So how do we?
Well, one of the like one of the issues uh, that hopefully I'll be writing about is the quest for unity and liberation. So the quest for liberty and you know unity is very important because there's forces right now, especially the major force, you know, the Republican Party, but also the media. And I'm talking about social platforms and the news media. They're really killing us, man. You know, and they're showing all these images. You know, like I mentioned before, stabbings, robberies, car chases. You know, I mean, they'll spend 20, 30 minutes on a car chase. Why can't the media just, you know, I'm not for censorship because that'll be the uh, one argument against it. But I think I'm not for censorship, but I'm for is a priority to show love, to show kindness, to show people that are compassionate, to show, you know, how people are good to one another. That's what I want to see on all the violence. I mean, all the violence, it just, man, it's unreal. And there's no way you know, there's no way that, like I said, if we're exposed to a lot of violence, then we'll act out. It breeds violence. This thing is way uh, uh, gone beyond reason. This stuff is, you know, it's a lack of ethics and morality. This country's suffering. All you got to do is go into Facebook. You're going to see the lack of ethics and morality. Oh, well, they're saying, you know, they have a First Amendment right to lack ethics and morality, to show kindness and goodness and compassion and love. In the 60s, you know, I'm a product of the 60s. The Chicano movement and the love generation. You know, the only criticism I have with the love generation, you know, I mean, I'm a product of rock and stuff, and the Beatles and the Stones and East LA Sound and Midnighters and everybody else, and Bretton Wood and people like that. But I think what really hurt that movement was drugs. And the drug use right now was that fentanyl and the opiates. Oh man, that has to stop. The love thing, hey, I'm a product of, you know, the Summer of Love, 67. There was nothing like it. There was nothing like 1967, man. You could go and hitchhike, man. You know, now you hitchhike, they'll kill you. They'll rob you, dump you out. But I think the drug use then and the drug use now has got to stop. Yeah.
So again, thank you for doing this talk, doing the research. Just a bit of background before I get the question. I'm a special ed teacher right now. Past 5 years. Before that, I was basically a long-term sub. So, and one of the things that I've always found, and again, also my major's in history. So that's, but it's very like the one thing I've noticed, like teaching history is actually very, very hard. Or like it's especially the problem with textbooks at the K through 12 level where it's again, like you can't. There's only the problem is like you could spend entire guys write their whole careers just on one specific field, and that's where like it's very hard to do. And in many ways, I think we encourage more memorization over actually like engaging with the historical events, the people. Like it's like the way I describe it. Oh yeah, what's so useful memorizing Pearl Harbor without understanding the build up to it, the effects of it, the how and the why? Just knowing it happened December 7th doesn't really tell you much. And that's where like you start seeing more of that when you get to college, where you see more like that emphasis on like engaging with the material. But what I'm trying to say is like how, again, as a you were teaching for over 30 years. How have you been able to make that balance right? Where like you don't want to make it, it's complicated. Unfortunately, history has to be complicated, but how to actually teach it and how to go about it is very challenging. And I'm just wondering how you look at that.
Well, I used culturally responsive teaching, okay? And I get a lot of that stuff from, you might want to check her out, Geneva Kay. She defined culturally responsive teaching as using the cultural knowledge, prior experiences, uh, frames of reference, and performance styles of ethnically diverse students to make learning encounters more relevant to and effective for them. So, you're validating culture, you're bringing it into I had assignments and films about the immigrant. I mentioned a bunch of them. Critical media skills was something I didn't get to teach that, but I taught just at that time just the basic media skills where I would show films and so forth. Where I had the classroom culturally was since Roosevelt's about 99% uh, uh, Mexican Latino. I had pictures of marches and stuff that they could relate to. A big challenge would be if you have a multi um, racial or multicultural students, then you would have to be more knowledgeable about their culture. So the teacher has uh, you know, uh, has a responsibility to learn about their cultures, and then something that I would do very early, I would write questions to the students. It was like an introduction, but I would write questions, that they could relate to. And man, I think I have a pile of stuff, they would tell me about party crews, tagging crews. I was into, uh, you probably don't know that there's a lot of subcultural groups at your school or the schools that the kids, and I went through this in my dissertation. They have ballers. I don't know if they still have ballers, skaters, taggers, party crews. You know, you have the jocks. You have rockers, punk rock. I mean, I went through all the subcultural groups and I interviewed them.
Yeah, I was a stoner metalhead.
And once you get into that stuff, hey, you're gonna get these kids because they're gonna tell you. And the ones that really set the trend, the ones that set the trend for subcultural groups of students, is the middle school kids. They're the ones that come out with all the different styles and stuff. You know. But anyhow, at any rate, I want to thank you for. Oh, you have one question?
Yeah, I guess I'm just trying to build off of the questions over here, and because in the last part of the book, you really talk about charters, schools, and how they're currently functioning and how they got there. And so, yeah, I guess part of the idea was let's have innovative schools where teachers can, have innovative ideas, and then it turned really corporate. And you really talk a lot about, I mean, just going back to the question about like the Republican Party and Florida and all of that, you really talk a lot about how the Democratic Party has essentially really collaborated, um, especially here in California. So I'm wondering about what your thoughts are, just going forward with that situation, because it's very much here, right? Like you talk about Nick Melvoin and Kelly Gomez, so those people are still there making decisions. They even want to go to Washington. Melvoin is running for Congress, so it's like he's probably going to fund more charter schools if he does get there. So it's like, what do you think is the pathway that we should take to limit that?
Yeah, there's a bill, I can't remember it right now, makes them, the charter schools, a little more responsible. But when you think of, innovation, they're using that, Al Shanker, he supported uh, charters, and then he changed his mind because he saw it, was morphing into privatization. LA Unified, and it's the district that I concentrate on most, has about 276 charter schools. That's a lot. And when the charter school legislation came out, I think it was signed in 92, 93 by Pete Wilson. I mean, he signed it, but it's about 276. But why does Pacific Palisades, Granada Hills, El Camino Real, these are high-performing charter high schools? Why? They shouldn't have never became charter schools. They're already high performing. So what gives? Well, charters are probably independent. Charters have an independent board, 501c3. They could pay their board of directors money. But I think the biggest, I really get into the Latino participation because the Latinos bring money. They bring money to charter schools. They bring, Title I money, other funding, loans and stuff like that. So unless you have a movement, like, California Charter School Association, they're powerful, man. They have a huge bureaucracy. They have a movement. They elect politicians not only for school boards. They elect them for the Assembly, for the Senate, for Congress. They have and I don't see anything really matching that to oppose them right now.
That's
And
good.
so I have problems. Pacific Palisades is a charter school.
Yes.
Come on, man, give me a break.
When I was on the board of directors with the union, I guess the board members voted to support the different compacts, and I think under Duffy, I think that's where we started losing the integrity of our contract. But even an even bigger problem is that they started using the schools that were under PI, low PI status. They were being sanctioned, so they used that against them. So a lot of these schools, they decided to write their own new plan, and some of them went charter, and that's where we really fractured the integrity of public education because they started folding. And if you remember, Brown v. Board and the guarantee to a quality education, like California has state standards. There's a reason for that you can monitor that, you codify it, and charter schools just want to bypass that whole thing. How do you hold them accountable? It's like they make up their own rules, and that's a problem I have with charters, that they basically make up their own rules, and there's nobody there to watch them.
Charter schools legally have to admit all students. That means special needs, lesbian, bisexual. I mean, there's so many
So
other letters now that they included. At-risk students on probation, English language learners. Charters are not supposed to discriminate against them, but yet they do. And I recommend that if they do, they should be, they should take their charters away, because they're discriminating. That's discrimination. And, but it's a movement. Fernando mentioned A.J. Duffy. He had applied to be a charter. I think it was Apple or something. It was some type of. It wasn't a charter school. I think it might have been a network or something. He had applied. He didn't get it. John Perez, one of the former UTLA president, was on the board of directors on Montesquieu Charter School. Even a guy by the name of Greg Solkovitz. He's also a board member. I don't know if he still is of a charter school. So that charter schools was a creature of the Democrats, the Democratic Party. People don't know that.
Most of the Democratic Party leadership, they don't send their kids to public school.
And also,
They don't send their kids to public school. The leadership of the Democratic Party, most of them, and they get financing from people like the owner of Netflix, the owner of the Broad Museum. So it's a lot. If you follow the money, we have a problem within the Democratic Party structure because most of their leadership.
But don't forget Eli Broad.
I think that's what I mentioned. Yeah, Eli Broad, the owner of Netflix, this is some of the biggest financiers of the charter industry. And so when we talk about dealing with charters, like everything else, we have to start dealing with how we're going to break the financing to the political structure, which is the Democratic Party.
Yeah, they have quite a bureaucracy, and they have a movement. Like I mentioned, they also support assembly people in the state senate, Congress. If they're, they'll support them if they give them the support for their charter school. So they have a huge movement going in. I think they still have it. I think LA still has about 276 charter schools, and then the state has 1,300. When the charter law came out, it was supposed to be only 10 per district. I think they had to go back to that cap. But I don't see any movement, and I see them still discriminating because, as fast as they go in there, they kick them out. They kick them out. And there's another group waiting to go in. There's another group waiting to go in. And it's a huge Latino group too. Because when you talk about charters, you talk about the college curriculum, that, parents, but in the book, when I looked at the scores and stuff, there wasn't that big of a discrepancy. But, but I don't see really anything right now currently that's going to stop or limit the growth. And then you have the co-location. That's another one. With all this drop in enrollment, you got all these charter people, they want to co-locate. So you rob the uniqueness and the identity of the school culture. You got to share just about everything, and it's still going to be with us. I don't really see anything that's going to stop it, and I think a lot of it was because the unions, including NEA, the AFT, and UTLA to a great extent. They even have a charter committee, and I'm not opposed to that, but I don't see really anything effectively going to really stop that movement.
Well, related to the title of the book, what kind of you think are the main legislative reform priorities for educational equity that you is in the title of your book? What do you think some of the main issues are? Obviously, charter school accountability to the public funding is one of them, right? Who we elect to the unified school district boards, but from a legislative standpoint, what do you feel are some of the biggest issues that people should get behind in terms of
Well,
legislative
actually,
reform?
in the equity thing, the definition that I use is pretty big. You know, I look at the practices, the programs, the curriculum, you know, high standards for all students. You know, all. You know, on the charter thing, I think that you know, it's a movement uh, that was proposed by Buddy. I think it's Ray Buddy, and it got its start when the Nation at Risk came out, and then when Al Shanker supported it, it took off, and then Al Shanker later on said, "No, I don't want anything to do with it. This is going to lead to privatization." So privatization of public education is what it is. Privatization, you know. Uh, like in Spanish, we have a saying, you know, uh, la educación pública se defiende, no se vende. In other words, public education is not for sale. You defend it. And so, in the absence of a huge movement, um, you're going to continue to see co-locations and more charters. You know, they spring up. You know, they're 501c3s. They pay their boards, monies and stuff. They make their own salaries.
Hedge funds.
So you're going to continue to see that. I think where we can really weaken them is when we document where the LGBTQ students, high risk students, students on probation, special ed. That's where your lawsuits have to be, because in my book I even, you know, there's quotes, you know, where people are being, you know, discriminated, or whether the charter supporters say, yeah, we have to let everybody in. That's, I think, is a major weakness, you know, because as fast as they get them in, as fast as they get kicked out, there's always a big line waiting, because they're fascinated by the college, you know, curriculum, and in the scores that I saw and compared, it wasn't that dramatic of a you know of a disparity.
I guess can I add something? Because I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, I agree. They're a big monster. It's hard to. I have seen. I've been encouraged by some local movements that have succeeded, like in Cudahy. In Cudahy, they stopped a KIPP charter school from building on the. It was. I think it was really because they were trying to build on toxic land, and there was no environmental review and all this stuff. So that's why the court did stop it. But I think, you know, it was, so it kind of provided
Yeah.
some inspiration, but it seems that overall it's really hard. And in that case, I think it was only for the environmental stuff. Like there was no support from the courts as far as, you know, yeah, educational quality or all
Yeah.
the false claims made by KIPP. So I guess it has to be like an education, right? Like we need an education campaign for the parents and the teachers, and because otherwise,
Yeah, the California Environmental Protection Act is very important. Um, I think in terms of the uh, the developers, uh, like in Lincoln Heights, I think there was a legislator who weakened it, um, and So now USC wants to build 184 luxury apartments not too far from the plaza, 7 stories. How in the hell did they do that? USC is the biggest property owner now in Lincoln Heights. It used to be the Italians, not anymore. It's USC. 184 luxury single units, 7 stories in Lincoln Heights, right, not too far away from,
Yeah,
man.
Which street is it on?
right on Main and Mission, that area.
And now what USC did, I passed by my old elementary school, Griffin Avenue, one of the elementary schools that I attended. And it has a big sign, and it says, USC Family of Schools. Oh my God! I said, wait a minute.
Well, plus the
Wait a minute. They want to. USC wants to build 184 luxury single units. So that's for their doctors. That's for their interns. That's for their specialists. That's for their high price bureaucrats. When they took Hazard Park, USC, did they help that poor area there in Ramona Gardens? Hell no. You think they're going to help Lincoln Heights? USC, I view
If you
them,
guys
I
wanna-
view them as a very, very
You guys
good.
want to do something about it? We're gonna have a meeting Wednesday at 6 p.m. at a church right off Broadway.
Yeah, Sacred Heart.
Sacred Heart,
No, the Church of Epiphany.
the Epiphany. Show up there.
what day?
It's Wednesday at 6 p.m.
Oh, Wednesday at 6.
I was there with people last night on this stuff, and it's you can just
And what
drive.
else?
I would try to, before you go, if you want to go to the meeting, go around Main Mission area, go through all these streets, then you'll have a better idea of what's going on. Wednesday 6 p.m. Show up.
Okay. Church of Epiphany.
Church of Epiphany.
I think it's Griffin Avenue in Alta.
And the other thing related to that, don't forget the multi-million investment in the biotech corridor going east along Valley, all the way to eastern part of the USC thing. So it's all connected, And there's
Yeah.
also the takeover of the old Japanese American retirement home facility on Lincoln Avenue that was brokered by then Attorney General Kamala Harris by an international real estate developer over there. So it's all kind of connected
Right,
in
don't
the same
forget,
area.
hey, don't forget Villarosa, Molina, and his gang. They want this. They want USC to take over Lincoln Heights.
It's all about the
Well, they want to get ready for the Olympics too, and they also want to do a village. They want to make a village, like it over there, like it.
Hotel not good enough for you?
Okay, I think that that's about it, Gabriel. I want to thank you all for being here, your questions and your interest. And like I said, the book is I think it's a super book. 31 years of my teaching, and also I was director of the Mexican American Education Commission for LA Unified. I was the last director. So I taught all these different classes, and thank you for being here today, and thank you for your questions and interest.
You can see John if you want a book.
Yeah.
We got a lot of books.